This is Main Street with Gary Allen. Now, here's Gary.
And good afternoon, everybody. Gary Allen here with you on Main Street. Hope you've had a wonderful week or so since we last spoke. We've got a very interesting show for you this afternoon. We'll talk about that in just a couple of minutes. But first off, I just want to thank the Japanese Gardens of South Florida for their support of this program, along with the Elks Lodges of South Florida for their continued support. We certainly do appreciate that. Our show this afternoon is a very interesting one. Many of you who have been caught at the airport where your flights have been delayed or your flights have been canceled, and I mean, besides the weather throughout this country over the last couple of years has gone helter-skelter, and therefore, you never know, a snowstorm is going to cancel your flight. And then there's also been flight delays due to computers going out. There's been, because of flight crews not being available, there's been just slow ground movement. There's been the lack of aircraft available. Well, we're going to try to answer one of those questions for you today. If you've ever been at the airport and you've been waiting for a flight and suddenly they tell you the flight crew is not available, they're not allowed to fly anymore, or the flight crew for you is over here and it's not here where it's supposed to be, and there is a shortage of airline pilots. Well, we're going to try to answer why, and we're going to talk to you about why some of the situations are the way they are with a shortage of pilots. Pilots don't get trained overnight. It takes years and years and years and many thousands of hours of flight time before the airlines will even hire someone to be an airline pilot to sit behind the controls of a 747, a 737, or back in my day, a 707. And there's a certain amount of qualifications that need to be applied here before an airline will hire someone to fly a billion-dollar aircraft in some cases, because between the aircraft itself, the engines and spare parts, it runs into the billions. And not to mention the passengers that are on board. So this afternoon, we have for you two people who are going to be able to answer a lot of those questions for you, as well as myself, because I have an airline background with my family. We have Mr. Eddy Wayman from Wayman Aviation Academy, located at North Perry Airport, originally started out in 1987 at Opelika Airport, and one of the former students and flight instructor, Mr. David John. So without further ado, would you please welcome Mr. Eddy Wayman and Mr. David John. Welcome, gentlemen, to Main Street.
Hello, thank you for having us.
Well, it's my pleasure to have you. Welcome, David. Although I still say, like before the program, it should be John David. It should make you a show business kind of personality. Eddy, you've been in the aviation industry, and if for those of you out there that are just wondering, the last name and the name of the school, yes, he's vice president, of communications for Wayman Aviation, the Aviation Academy. How long have you personally been involved before you became part of the family business in aviation yourself?
Sure. So funny enough, Wayman's actually the first name. A lot of people get that mixed up backwards. So I'm actually Wayman Eddy. Louis is the last name, L-U-Y. But so grew up in aviation here in South Florida. Basically grew up at Opelika Airport. My father founded the school in 1987. So I've been flying since I was a little guy. I used to, wash the airplanes, fuel them, all that stuff. Climb the trees at Opelika Airport, right? It's part of who I am down there. And I think that's where you got some of your training as well, right?
Yep. I learned at Burnside Ott. Started out flying a Cessna 150. And sure. I'll never forget the flight instructor said to me, okay, land the plane, and pulled me over there. And he got out of the plane. And I looked at him like, where are you going? And that's when I soloed. And it was, I got to tell you, the most beautiful feeling in the world is when you're up there in the clouds or dodging around in the clouds. And you look down and you see the earth, and it's so spectacular.
Yeah, it's liberty, it's freedom, and it's all encompassing. You really have to be present when you're flying. You have to leave your worries on the ground. That phone call you've got to get to, put your phone on mute. I mean, now we're all flying with cell phones and things like that. So you have to put it on mute and just be in the moment when you're flying. So I've been part of the flight school literally my whole life. I got my pilot license when I was 18. I was flying well before then. Went off and actually had another career, entirely different career. Went to Florida State, moved to New York, had a whole different career.
What'd you do?
I'm an interaction designer, a web developer, basically.
Oh,
So I moved to New York, and I was working for AOL, Time Warner, and Apple on these huge 100 million person websites.
You
And
still
then,
get involved in that, building
yeah,
websites for anybody?
well, really
You
just
and
our
I,
own company, right? So I'm in
well,
charge of website and our
you and I are
social.
going to, you and I are going to have to talk.
Sure,
You and I are going to have to talk, sir.
sure.
Um,
So I
well,
still very much.
You went to FSU. I went here.
Sure.
I went there.
I'm a fan of all the Florida schools. It's I've had a lot of good friends that go to UF, to UM, to UCF.
Yeah.
And I've got two boys now that are 14 and 15 trying to figure out what their next step's going to be.
You're too young to have children, young man.
Well, that's part of the reason I came back down. So I was in New York in this other career kind of. So the dynamic here is my father is ATP, AMP, IA, great pilot, international pilot. And my brother, the oldest in the family, who David John knows, of course, is also ATP, 12,000 hour pilot, all those kind of things. So when you have siblings, you have to do something else, right? So I went down the computer path, and I did, the websites and all that kind of stuff. And that's what found me in New York. My wife and I, got pregnant and started a family, and so we didn't want to do it in New York. And so the thinking was, okay, she's from Ohio and I'm from Fort Lauderdale. There was no way she was going to go back to Cleveland, Ohio. So
no.
Exactly.
No. I listen, as a stand-up comic, you can tell your wife I spent a lot of nights, spent a whole month there one night in Cleveland.
Yeah. So that brought us back down here, down to Fort Lauderdale. And so I started taking those next steps. So I got my MBA, and in the process rejoined the family business, kind of reignited the aviation side of my brain. Flew enough to stay current, but it was mostly on the administrative side because my brother, the 12,000 hour ATP flight instructor, all those things, was really the one that was leading the flight department. So I was leading the admissions, the marketing, the business, accounting, all those side of things, along with our sister, who's phenomenal. And she's still with the school, and she does all the registrar stuff, Veterans Affairs, universities, visas, TSA, all those kind of things. She's phenomenal. So really a family business at the core, although it's vastly outgrown us over the years.
It has a tendency to do so. I do not know why Burnside Ott went out of business, but I know it was a good flight school. I know a lot of the flight instructors that were my flight instructors ended up working for Midway Airlines. A couple, I think, went to work for Eastern before they went out of business. It was just, and that was my goal. I mean, that was my whole goal. When I got out of the Air Force, I thought, okay, I've been flying Hueys while I'm in the Air Force. I've been getting some C-130 time, but this is it. And then my eye vision started to go, and that was the end of that story, and then that's how I got involved in this stuff, doing some broadcasting. David, what brought you to the world of aviation?
So it's a pretty interesting story. I don't have an extensive aviation background in terms of my family life, but I was actually born in St. Lucia. And when my parents got married, we moved to Grenada. So essentially, with the low cost of air travel back in the day, it was very easy for us to hop in between the islands. And my favorite part was flying. That was it. I was always intrigued by the airplanes, how they worked. My favorite airplane back in the day was the Dash 8. It was the workhorse of the Caribbean. So I absolutely loved it. And one day I was fortunate enough to get offered a jump seat. And that was it. It just lit a fire, and I never looked back after.
Yeah. Once you smell that kerosene, boy, it's my first flight as a kid was not with my dad, although he was flying Connies at the time. And David, you're too young to remember that. Eddie, you probably remember the Constellation. That was my first love. It was, my dad said it was like flying a Cadillac. But once I took a lesson, not a lesson from him, but from one of his friends. My father did not have the patience to teach me anything. But once I got up there and I was looking around and stuff, it was like, okay, this is what I want to do. I had no aspirations for show business or anything. This is what I want to do. Unfortunately, it didn't quite work out 100%, but you know what? It's okay. I mean, things work out the way they're supposed to. Yeah. Eddie, I want to talk to you about the number one question that's on a lot of people's minds. Why is there a shortage of airline pilots? Number one, you and I both know the answer, and so does David. But why is there a shortage? What is Wayman doing to help that shortage? And I know that I have somewhere in here how many pilots are going to be needed. Like 30 and 40,000 pilots over the next 5 to 7 years are going to be needed every year, and even more so 7 years from now.
Oh yeah,
What began this problem, and
sure.
what are flight schools like yours doing about it to help
So,
improve the situation?
yeah, absolutely. So the pilot shortage was a long time coming. Pre-COVID, we used to have this conversation about the looming pilot shortage, just looming pilot shortage. There's a lot of people that learn to fly. Vietnam into the 80s, 90s, right? A
Yep.
lot of people learned to fly there, and then we had deregulation, and the airlines changed a lot. Eastern Airline went out of business. A lot of consolidation and things like that. And who got hurt was the pilots, right? If you were a pilot working for the airlines, you maybe got laid off, went to a different industry, or just wasn't making the income you thought you would as a highly trained professional with a lot of responsibility flying all around the world. And so the pilot career was not particularly attractive in the 90s, early 2000s, right? Wages weren't great. Lifestyle is difficult, traveling the world, living out of a suitcase, that kind of thing. And then there was this looming, because there weren't a lot of new pilots coming in, the pilot population was getting older on average. And pilots have a mandatory retirement age of 65. It used to be 60, but it got pushed back to 65 years ago. And so
aren't they trying to increase that to 67 now?
Yep, that's still part of the conversation. My understanding is it doesn't have a lot of traction on the Hill, but it is part of the conversation. But even then, it's a stopgap. It's a Band-Aid, that will maybe extend the pilot ability another 2 years. And there's good pros and cons for it. But coming back to it, basically, there was just a lot of pilots that were retiring, a huge amount. I think I've heard the number that in the next 10 years, something close to 50% of the working airline pilots are going to retire in the next 10 years, right? That's how heavy we are in pilots towards, the second part of their careers. Right now, late 50s, 60s, they're going to retire in the next 10 years.
Yeah.
So this was slow coming. It was slow coming. We all saw it coming, and we kept talking about this oncoming pilot shortage. And then, March 20th happened, and everything shut down, right? And that, of course, affected the airlines dramatically, and they furloughed pretty much all of their pilots. All the pilots just got a letter saying, hey, stay home. All flights are canceled. We're going to figure this out. 2 weeks to stop the spread, right? And what came out of that? What came out of that was a much longer furlough, right? And so the older pilots that were pending retirement went ahead and took those early retirement offered. And so if you're 60, 63, you've got 2 years to go, you don't want to expose yourself. And so a lot of captains took that early retirement. I believe American Airlines alone had nearly 1,000 pilots take that early retirement. Something like 700 or 800 captains took that early retirement. But what happened was something unexpected. Aviation on the cargo side boomed, right? And on the executive charter side boomed, because all these people still had to mobilize, right? Amazon, everyone started ordering a whole lot more from Amazon and online. And so Amazon's aviation capacity exploded. And everyone we knew just shifted over from the passenger side to the cargo side. And then the executive side started trying to, because people do still have to move and they don't want to fly those, large airliners with 200 of their closest friends. So the charter side of things grew pretty quickly as well. And so it really absorbed the pilot shortage, the pilot furloughs. And within, I'd say about a year, by March of 2021, most pilots that wanted to work were working. And so then we started coming back to recovery in that second, going to the third year. And all of a sudden we needed to fill all those slots for those pilots that retired earlier. Just simply not enough pilots in production, because like you said, it takes time to make a pilot. You just can't hire them off a newspaper ad or Indeed. It takes time.
No, but I'll be willing to sit up front. I mean, the only thing is, since my days of flight training, and David, I know you're too young to remember this, and now Eddie does. It went from round gauges, instruments, to a glass cockpit. Now, even my father would probably go, okay, what? Where? I mean, he'd catch on to it. But the L-1011s didn't have glass cockpits back then.
Oh, no.
I think the DC-10s did a little bit. That's the other thing, too. Now, both of you are way too young to remember this, but back in the middle 60s, your dad would remember this, Eddie. back in the middle 60s when they went from 4 guys up front to 3,
Sure.
and then the DC-9 came along where there was only going to be 2 up front, the airlines went out on strike for 30 days. Every major carrier in this country went on strike for 30 days, the Airline Pilots Association, because of the fact that they didn't want to lose any more of their friends, flight engineers, navigators, to what it is. But now it's like there's only 2 guys. I believe most airliners only carry 2 guys up front, correct?
Yep, that's the norm.
Except for maybe Qantas, because they fly international. I think the 747s and the A380s still have at least 3 guys up front. I think. I could be wrong about that.
That's a whole nother conversation, but that gets into pilot time. So a pilot can only be a pilot in command for 8 hours. And so, for example, we've got students now flying for Emirates, Dubai to Miami. It's a 17-hour flight. So there's 2 full crews on board. And when they were here, I took them to get some Cuban coffee and some pastelitos. And he was telling me that basically he gets on board, he takes off, he flies for 4 hours, goes to sleep for 8 hours on the plane, wakes up, flies another 4 hours. And so it's an interesting, that's a whole nother kind of marathon, long haul level of flying that we're very proud that our students are doing that.
Yeah, yeah. Tommy, would you please bring up the logos and stuff for Wayman? I just want people to know how they get in touch with you. Wayman.edu. I spoke to one of your secretaries the other day, and she gave me all the information I needed. One of the things that I think is vitally important, and David, you could answer this probably pretty well. When you go to select a flight school, what are some of the things that you need to think about before you sign up and get approval for some loans and an education? And we're going to get into the education aspect of this because that's vitally important. The airlines want young men and women with college. They don't want you to just walk in with a high school degree. What was some of the reasons why you selected Wayman, David?
So it's a pretty interesting question, actually.
That's why they pay me the big bucks.
I initially moved here as an international student. And as a student, what was really important to me was I found a flight school that had a great structure. They had a welcoming environment. It was extremely, and still is, extremely diverse. So those things were opening the door of opportunities for people who looked for those things. The backing of being essentially the largest flight school in South Florida, the plethora of aircraft that they had, as well as the extensive history of the school, because that does play a tremendous role, right? You want to invest your time and money somewhere with someone who has been there, has done that, has gone through several iterations, and the path was
the lineage is very important. How that like Eddy is like what, your second generation.
That's true, yeah.
Right.
And we can trace our flight school back to Burnside Ott, which traces us back to the Navy trainers of World War II, going all the way back to the Wright brothers and some of the early trainers here in South Florida.
Yeah. But David, what separates your training from another school's training? I mean, I don't know if Eddy's on the flight line at all, not going up with students or something like that. I really don't know. But I mean, what separates Wayman from everybody else in your eyes?
We are a professionally oriented college, right? Because that's essentially what we are. We are not we have transitioned from, what you would consider a mom and pop school, and we are training pilots for a professional environment. And essentially that is something that you would not find at every other flight school. I think we strike an exceptional balance between creating sound pilots, but you also want to contribute and make those pilots holistic individuals who are not only able to apply the stick and rudder skills, but they have the interpersonal skills to survive in the world of work, to excel in whatever company or whatever facet they would like to go into. And that is what we strive to do here.
You know, you bring up something very interesting, David and Eddie. I want you to come in on this. When you are looking at a prospective student, fresh, green as grass, and you know what I mean, Eddie, and so does David. What skill sets do you look for in a prospective student? What type of maturity do you look for in a student? Because all pushing all the fun and games aside, it is a type of business where the maturity must be there. I remember when my dad taught at Eastern's Flight School after he retired. There's your phone number, folks, 786-563-0124, extension 1406. Please give them a call. I love these people. Eddie's already going to hire me. I know he is. He's going to bring me back to Miami eventually.
The main
But
phone is a little different, if you don't mind me sharing that with you. It's
what's that?
the main phone number is actually 305-685-6468. That's kind of what we have on all our material, just so you know.
Okay. All right. And you can catch that on the website as well. There has to be a sense of maturity. I remember my dad saying to me, because I said to him one day, I said, Dad, of a class of 30 or 25 pilots that you hire, how many do you guys interview? He said, well, the pre-interview other aligned pilots would interview could be as much as 1,500 to 2,000 people for those 30 people. Eddie, we've lost you. There you go. Could be as much as 3,000 people that are interviewed, 1,500 people that are interviewed between one or two or three classes, depending upon how many they're going to have. And he said, not every military trained pilot is capable of flying a commercial airline. Now, everybody sense of maturity and sense of urgency and calmness and cool is extremely important. There we go. Is extremely important. What do you look for in a student before you even accept them into your school?
Well, I guess I can take that, and then I'm kind of curious to see what David
says.
What actual students that come through. But I wear mostly the hat of admissions, and recruiting and spokesperson, helping students come to our school. So to what David said, we're an airline-oriented academy and now a college. So we're not your typical flight school. There's lots of flight schools that'll take a weekend warrior that wants to learn to fly for themselves on Sunday afternoons, but that's not what we do, right? So we are airline oriented. We have 6 airline partners, and they expect a certain caliber of graduate from us. So one, we're looking for students that are mostly available full-time. They want to make this their career, right? They're not just looking to fly down the beach, but are serious and airline oriented. So we've got to think, what is your ideal airline pilot? So I'm looking for someone who's serious, dedicated. We're in South Florida, have to have good English to be a pilot. And funny enough, when I go out and I do a lot of career fairs at high schools, at colleges, and things like that, even middle schools, and I usually ask if any of the at that point kids, do any sports, gymnastics, football, soccer, any of those kind of things, because I find that those students tend to have a really good spatial awareness of what's going on around them, as well as the tenacity that sports often take to be good and consistent, right? I mean, that's just one of my indicators, but we're looking for someone adventurous that really wants to throw themselves into it. They don't have to be a brainiac. They don't have to be a physics major. What they need to do is have a passion for aviation, because you can't force someone to be a pilot. They really have to love it, want it. It's long hours. It's an interesting lifestyle. And so you need the passion, the ability. There's a certain level of intelligence. Aviation is not for dummies. There's a lot of studying involved there. But a lot of it is practical smarts, I always say it's not physics. It's where physics actually is applied. You're living it. So
Right.
Passion is probably the most important thing. Now, does that translate into our students, David?
I think, yeah, definitely. For the most part, I mean, no system is perfect, right? So we always, once in a while, you have someone who slips through the cracks. But aviation is set up in a way that it almost filters out those people themselves, right? Itself, right?
Yes.
But for the most part, we do have a contingent of students that are dedicated, passionate about it. I think that's the one commonality that you would hear if you go throughout the walls of the school. It's the passion around aviation, right? Everybody has an interesting story about how they got into it, what inspired them, and that's really what runs the school. It's the collective passion for aviation.
I think my dad said it best once when we were at the dinner table. when one brother turned to him and said, "Dad, before there were jet airplanes, airline pilots didn't exactly make a tremendous amount of money," which they did not. I mean, they did better than the average Joe on the street, but they were still only making $35,000 or $40,000 a year. The airlines didn't, they weren't big fleets like they have today. The minute the DC-8 and 707 came on board, whoa, salaries skyrocketed right up straight through. I think my dad's final year was $170,000 a year. His retirement was pretty good, although Eastern Airlines, man, they folded. They went down fast.
Part of South Florida, Eastern Airlines. But you're absolutely right. So the climbing salary is probably the biggest thing that has come out of COVID and the pilot shortage, right? Where before there was very little financial incentive for somebody to become a pilot. Because of the shortage, there was a huge boom in hiring bonuses. All the American Airlines subsidiaries got a 50% raise for their pilots. The pilot unions have been very active the last few years because people realized how important that role is. It's some heavy responsibility on those shoulders when you've got 200 souls on board. And I feel like now pilots are being properly compensated. It makes a big difference.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. And by the way, I found it here. In 2023, there was 8,000 pilots needed. In 2025, there's 34,000 pilots that will be needed. In 2030, 14,500 pilots are estimated to be needed. And by 2032, 128,000 pilots will be needed that year. And this is, of course, the travel demand is only going to get bigger and better. But I do notice that the airlines are cutting back, like on aircraft the size of A380s. They're realizing that they're probably better off with the A350 or the 767 or something along those lines as far as what's currently going on. I know you have relationships with a number of commercial airlines, Eddy. What do they tell you that they want in an individual to sit in their right seat? Because you don't get to the left seat right away. You got to go to the right seat, folks. You got to be a first officer first and foremost. What are they telling you they look for that would help somebody watching this program?
Well, you touched on a lot of things that I'd like to come back to,
sure,
including aircraft types and college and all those things. But what are they looking for? I think so. We have 6 airline partners right now. Probably the most common that you would know is Spirit Airlines, which is also based down here in South Florida. They're our most recent collegiate pathway program partner. But what are they looking for? When we have captains come through the building all the time, and what they're looking for is captains. They're not looking for first officers, right? Even though you're sitting in the first officer seat, they're hiring captains because they expect you to step up into the captain seat once you've got, a few years of experience under your belt. So they're looking for that decision maker, the confidence, the technical ability, but also management skills, which are not taught to technical pilots, right? Because a captain is, yes, technically flying the aircraft, but they're also managing a crew, managing the crew, the cabin crew, couple hundred passengers, ground crew, coordinating travel for their people, working with dispatch. So they're almost like they're small team supervisor managers on every single flight. So it's those captain skills I think that everyone's really looking for. And actually, that's one of the big issues right now is that there's actually a good amount of first officers in the system now. So, Spirit, American, Delta, United, they've all kind of pulled back on their hiring, I'd say, in the last 6 months because there's a lot of first officers in the system. There's not enough captains. And so they're trying to train those first officers up into those captain roles. And that's an interesting dynamic change that has happened just recently in the last 6 months to a year.
Yeah. We are... I want to thank everybody for watching in here. We're continuing on. We're going to be talking more aviation. This is Gary Allen with Main Street. My one guest is Eddy Lou. Is it Lou Wayman?
Yeah, I go by Wayman.
Yeah, Eddy Lou Wayman. He's the vice president in charge of communications and one of the flight instructors and former students, Mr. David John. We thank you so much for joining us, and we having an interesting program. We're talking about shortage of airline pilots and what is being done about it. And, we're very, very pleased to have these two gentlemen join us. I know that only because I still have friends they're long retired, but they still have connections in the military. The military pilots aren't coming out of the military like they were either. They're not leaving because the pay has gotten definitely better for them.
That's right. So Sorry, I'm trying to get rid of this ding in the background. The military used to be a huge source for the pilots that were coming into the civil world, but frankly, the Air Force, the Army, they're just not training as many pilots as they did. I think their peak was the Vietnam era. There was a little bit more that came up when we got into the Middle East, but now a lot of those pilots are flying drones, remotely operated vehicles, and that. Only some of that translates, and none of the licensing officially translates into civil aviation. So it's almost like those pilots come out and have to restart. I'm curious if there's going to be some sort of future development rating-wise with the FAA where someone will be able to transfer those over. But sitting on the ground is different than being on the aircraft. That's why soloing is such an important milestone for pilots.
I remember that. We're going to take a look at some photos, Eddie and David, about the school. I had some fun going through these. I had Eddy send me one that's my favorite.
Yeah, it's my favorite.
That's my favorite. And while we have this picture up, there is your fleet of aircraft. I see some Cessnas and Pipers.
Yep.
Is that a 150 right behind the group?
152. So our fleet is half 152s, which is a two-seater for the layperson, and then the other half is 172s, which is a four-seater. And then we use Piper Senecas and now Tecnam P2006s for our multi-engine training. So it's a nice diverse fleet. We're pushing close to 40 airplanes, about 200, 250 odd students at any given time. David John gets to go up in those planes all the time. David, you want to say anything about the aircrafts?
I mean, they're pretty standard trainers. Nothing too fancy. We have a combination of the advanced avionics, which would be the G1000 aircraft. And we also have the standard six-pack. But even the standard six-pack airplanes, and Eddy would know that, we've also upgraded them. So they're digital, for the most part. Very well-maintained fleet. That's kudos to our maintenance team. And the diversity in the fleet also enhances the training experience, if I would say so myself.
Let's go to the next picture. Oh, there we go. There's some of your students and graduates, and looks like a couple of captains there that are on the left and the right.
Well, this has to do. Yeah, this photo really has to do with our outreach. So we're really big in the community, and our South Florida community has a lot of rich aviation history. And so we made a point early on, I'd say probably about 10 years ago, I joined the first group to put on an air expo at Opelika that brought a couple of thousand kids to the airport. And, I saw the smiles and the interest, and we did discovery flights that day. And I realized, we as a community, the aviation community, has to do a lot more as far as outreach goes. One, it's not your typical career. So guidance counselors, now they're called brace advisors, they're not really recommending aviation or pilots, whether it's technician or pilot or dispatchers. It's not a common career that a counselor will say. They'll say, be a lawyer, be a doctor, be an engineer, go off to college. But what is the number one employer in South Florida? Aviation. 1 in 4 jobs in South Florida directly tied to aviation. We've got major airlines based down here, repair centers, Miami International, Fort Lauderdale International, the biggest employers in South Florida. And our schools are just not aware of that. So we started doing outreach.
I remember when I was in high school, and I went to Hollywood Hills, which is not far from where you guys are located. I was in their first graduating class. I remember when one of my instructors knew my dad because he played golf with him. He said, "Are you going to be like your dad, an airline pilot?" I said, "I hope so." I said, "But you never know." I mean, like we discussed earlier, just because you want to fly for the airlines and you want to sit in the right or left seat doesn't mean you are going to sit in the right or left seat. I mean, it takes, as we've been discussing, a certain skill set. Let's get to the next photograph. There's the school. Explain this one, Ed.
So that's our new academy building. We actually have a campus now at North Perry, 5 buildings. And so this building we put up in 2019, $3 million investment dedicated entirely to our students. If you were to walk through those halls, it feels like you're in college. There's classrooms, a library, big dispatch, testing center, cafeteria, and it's entirely dedicated to our students, open 7 days a week from sunrise until sunset. And it's David John's office. It's where he spends all his days. I think if you go to any other flight school in South Florida, it's not going to look anything like this. This is
so if I come down, for a visit, David, this is where I'm going to find you.
Definitely.
Okay.
Definitely.
Let's go to the next photograph because there we go. Now, I'm thinking this is a 172, right?
Yes.
David?
Correct.
Is it the standard 172 or is this the upgraded 172? Because there are the gauges like I used to see when I was flying, Eddie. You remember those very well, I'm sure. But is this the upgraded 172 or is this the standard 172?
No, so that would just be the standard 172 that we have here.
Right.
Yeah.
How many hours does a student get in that? Oh, here we go. This is I believe a site, your flight simulator area or one of the areas, correct?
That's the dispatch area. Yeah, that's where all the students and instructors go through when they're completing the flight activity. So you go there, get the keys, head out, and you come back. It's like a check-in desk at the airport, if that makes sense.
No, we used to have to do that at Burnside Ott too. We'd have to go in, check in, write our name, get a key for the aircraft, then go out, do the flight, pre-flight, and then take off. And I would always go over the beach, particularly around spring break time, Eddie. I would always go over the beach, and I was caught a couple of times. When I would fly back, I was pulled off to the side by a couple of instructors. They said, "Gary, quit buzzing the beach," And I say, "Hey, I can't help it. I'm a red-blooded American guy." Please contact these guys at wayman.edu. They're a great flight school. Let's talk about the educational aspects of this. I know you're connected with a number of grants that people can get. Talk about that as well, Eddie. Talk about the schools that you are connected with so these young people can get degrees, which is very and vitally important to the airlines as well.
Sure. Well, buzzing down the beach, first of all, is the first flight we do, that first discovery flight, which is where I would recommend anyone who themselves interested, or maybe they've got a son or a daughter who's interested in flying, get them a discovery flight. We do them. They're $180. Every flight school in South Florida does them. And basically you're in the pilot seat of a 172 or a 152 with an instructor right next to you. And you fly down the beach. You take off, you fly down the beach. It's usually about an hour-long flight. Fly around Key Biscayne, back along South Beach. And basically in that 1 hour, you'll know if you love it or hate it, right?
Yeah.
And if you love it, you can't do anything else. And if you hate it, well, there's air traffic control and there's maintenance and there's other things you can do in the aviation world.
Yeah.
But I strongly recommend anyone that's even remotely thinking about it, try a discovery flight. We don't do.
By the way, my flights buzzing the beach, Eddie, were not discovery flights. I mean, I was like at 500-600 feet. I mean, okay.
Sure.
I wasn't like at 1,000 feet or 1,500 feet. I was like down there trying to check out the college girls for spring break. That's how bad I was.
Well, we still love, and that's still my favorite flight. Whenever an opportunity comes to give a discovery flight to, a friend or something like that, usually our instructors do it, but sometimes I do it myself just because it is still one of my favorite flights, just to get out there and buzz down the beach for an hour and get people excited about aviation. It's kind of my favorite thing. But that leads into the education side of things. So, there's two ways to go about it. Aviation historically is vocational, right? And that's been a big buzz in the education world for a while. Vocational certifications, the trades are being lost to a large extent, but aviation largely is vocational. You train, you get your pilot certificates, private, instrument, commercial, and you apply, for your first job, whether it's as an instructor or towing banners or cargo, whatever it might be, until you've got the time to reach the airlines. Then there's the collegiate path, right, which is going to any of the college partners or our own college program and doing a 2-year associate degree. Larger schools offer a 4-year aeronautical science degree, but it's not a hard requirement for the airlines. It's definitely preferred, right? If you and somebody similarly qualified apply to American Airlines and they've got a college degree and you don't, well, that's definitely something that's a feather in their cap and they're going to be higher up the list. But that being said, we actually created a hybrid program. So we are now an accredited college in the state of Florida. This year, we're going to become Wayman College of Aeronautics, a little name change up. And we offer 2-year associate degrees in aeronautical science, as well as aviation management and maintenance management. But what's the benefit here? Why did we make that jump over to the college side of things? One, your pilot's licenses count for college credits with us. So if you're flying, your pilot licenses, your ground schools make up a full third of your college credits. So just the process of becoming a pilot, you've got a third of your college degree done. And if somebody out there is listening and they've already got a private pilot or instrument license under the belt, well, they can apply that to get college credit with us and wrap it up, right?
Wow.
So a third of your credits is just flying and the related ground schools. A third of your credits, the next third of your credits are aeronautics related classes, aviation law, aircraft systems. I'm not asking anyone to read Russian literature. We're going to be talking about airplanes, and that's college credit right there. And then the last third is your gen ed, your basic algebra, English, ethics, those kind of things. But we always try to give them an aviation spin because we are an aviation college, right? So we are now Wayman College of Aeronautics. But we continue to have partnerships. We are Miami-Dade College's flight training partner, Florida Memorial's flight training partner, Liberty University's flight training partner, which means that if you actually sign up for their aviation program, if you sign up for the Miami-Dade or Florida Memorial aviation program, you're actually flying with us, right? You do the ground with them, but you're flying with us. And so after living in that university level of expertise and quality, we went through our own accreditation process, which is difficult, and came through now as Wayman College of Aeronautics. Very proud of that. So that opens up a lot of interesting things for students. One, better access to financial aid, right? We've got full 100% student loans available right now, more access to scholarships from the Greater Miami Aviation Association, Latino Pilot Association, many other out there that are really looking for college students to get these scholarships. It's a nice filter for them to know how serious their students are. And then the FAA has built in something beneficial for college students, which is a reduced ATP requirement. ATP is airline transport pilot. You need 1,000 hours. If you graduate from a college program, a 2-year college program, you need 1,250 hours, which saves your average student, maybe 6 months earlier they can enter the airlines, and the airlines are all about seniority. So a lot of nice benefits there on the educational side. There's still the option, vocational or collegiate education, but what we're doing now is a little bit of a hybrid where you almost start vocational and transfer into the collegiate to get all the benefits.
Tommy, you have a question for our guest. Tommy? Go ahead, Tommy. You asked the question.
It's actually in the chat. If you already have a college degree, is there any savings if you just want to do the aviation segment of the training?
So if you have a college degree, are there savings in doing the aviation side of it? Probably the biggest savings is that third that is kind of general education, your English, your algebras, ethics, history, those all count in. Or at least you'd sit with a college advisor with your transcript and they'd say, yes, we can give you credit for these, right? So potentially you skip a third of the credits. But it doesn't really impact the aviation training itself because you still have to do those courses, right? So it's different courses. Let's say you had a degree in math. Great. We can count your basic math and your general eds, but you still have to do the flying.
Got it. Perfect. Thanks, guys.
You got it. Anytime, Tommy. Anytime. I always look at Tommy ask a question because he's a very, very smart young man. He really is smart. That's what I was going to ask, your math skills. Now, I got through basic algebra, and that was kind of it for me because that's when they discovered my dyslexic issue. I invert numbers and it was all kind of crazy, even though I still got all my pilot's licenses because I really had to study and really concentrate when I took my flight exams. And I went to the Burnside Ott used to send us over to the FAA. Did you guys still have the FAA exams on your property, or do they have to go to the FAA offices to take their pilot exams? For their commercial ticket or whatever it can be.
Yeah, so we actually have a testing center here where students can go and take essentially every single FAA written exam that there is offered. So we do have that on-site testing facility.
Is it still 70 or better and you pass?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, we always aim for higher though. We want 80s and 90s, of course. If you have a lower score, you end up getting more questions in the practical exam. So it's funny because I tell new students this all the time. Aviation is unlike any class you've taken before. It's not history. You show up, you get a C, and you move on to the next one. if you get a C in aviation, you might not land on the runway. So we always train to 100% proficiency to be able to pass that exam, because when you've gone through our training, the final step is, after your written exam, is you sit down with a practical examiner, an FAA exam designee. It's not the FAA per se, but somebody blessed by the FAA to do exams. And then, by and large, they tend to be retired airline guys or former instructors, things like that. And they sit with you, and they are going to test your. They're going to have a conversation with you. Explain to me the systems of the aircraft. What are we doing today? Explain to me the airspace. And so you've got to know your stuff and be able to explain it. And then, of course, go up and fly and do your maneuvers well. So there's a practical exam that happens as well, and that happens on site.
Yeah. What kind of jobs, what kind of skill set does someone need to have to even think about working for the airlines? We talked about it briefly earlier, but what, beyond what we discussed, the maturity level, the educational level, the flight training, what other skills do they need to bring to the table to, in other words, to get all the way to where they're sitting in the captain's seat 30 years later?
If I may add, I think it's really about being able to manage yourself, manage resources, and ultimately how you interact with people. I think that is a distinguishing quality between the average Joe and the person that a Delta, United, and American Airlines looks for when they're thinking about upgrading somebody and investing that money into a captain, because ultimately that's what it is. It is an investment. So you have to be somebody who is capable of managing time, managing resources, and being able to interact with people.
Yeah.
I'll give you a great little story that I heard from a recruiter. Because, like I mentioned, we get visits from airlines all the time to talk to our students. We have expos constantly.
Don't you have one coming up, Eddy?
We do. We have one coming up in mid-May, which you can find on our website, wayman.edu. We're about to push out all the marketing for it. And that'll be a pilot career expo at North Perry Airport. We're aiming, I believe, for May 11th. You can confirm that on our website and our social media at Wayman Aviation on all the platforms. But the story that our recruiters give is, who's in your interview? It's other captains, right? So by the time you sit at an airline interview, they know you know how to fly. You've got the thousands of hours, you've got the certifications. Otherwise, you would have never got into that chair. And so when you're being interviewed by other captains, they're trying to figure out if they can spend a 4-day trip with you, right? Is this person someone that I can work with? Because you're actually being hired by your colleagues, which is a pretty interesting process.
Yeah. And David, you kind of hit it right on the head. When you're being interviewed by an airline, I know my dad has said this many, many times, and my two uncles, again, they were both captains for 2 different airlines as well. They used to say that when you're being interviewed back then to be a flight engineer, because that's where that's where you started, they're thinking about you in the right seat already. Is this guy got what it takes? And nowadays, and I guess I have to be fair, does this young lady have what it takes to get to sit in that right seat? And there are more and more women who are flying that are captains and first officers than ever before. I mean, when my dad had the first female in his flight class, he was not a happy camper. I will tell you the truth. He was that old World War II generation. He was fit to be tied. But I've gone up front when I've traveled around as an entertainer, when I was opening act for a lot of different entertainers over the years, and I've looked up front on a 767 or something, and there was a young lady sitting in the right seat. They fly. Listen, you don't have to be strong to fly a commercial airplane. Most of them are like driving a Cadillac. David, you may not know what a Cadillac is, but they're sort of out of style nowadays. So, but it used to be a big giant car. I don't know. Now they're these Escalades and stuff.
Well, you're absolutely right on that. And they're not just in the right seat. There are tons of excellent female captains. Just this last Saturday, we had a Girl Scouts event at our facility. We had, I think, close to 100 young ladies there learning about aviation, getting their aviation merit badge or something of the sort. And it was all led by an American Airlines 777 captain, Christine, Captain Rupert. And so she's going to do another Girl Scouts event at Miami International in the American Airlines hangar. And there's just so many of these wonderful women that are flying. Right now, about 8% of the professional pilot world is female. And that number is growing. I'm happy to say that our school is incredibly diverse. I think we're pushing 20% female population, not to mention just about every country you can think of, everywhere from South America, the Caribbean, Asia, students from just about everywhere at our school. But aviation is changing. It's an international career, and it's more and more a reflection of just the wide population we have. Funny enough, the country with the most female pilots is India. I'm told that India is now in double digits, somewhere like 12 or 13% of their pilots are female.
Well, you mentioned an airline earlier that also has a lot of female pilots. I know that for a fact. You mentioned the airline earlier. Oh, I'm sorry. I
mentioned we'll talk about American. Spirit has a ton of our.
They're from the Middle East.
Oh, Emirates.
Emirates. They have a lot of female pilots. Qantas has a lot of female pilots. Absolutely. I know personally one of their ambassador pilots, and that's Mr. Travolta, who can fly just about everything and anything under the sun.
That's a passion.
Absolutely. Well, I haven't mentioned this person's name in like 40 years. We dated when we were in college, and I introduced her to her first time of flying. Her name was Rita, and I don't know where she went to flight school eventually, but I know that she was with U.S. Air. I think before then she was with Kentucky Airways. And now I think, well, she's got to be retired by now, because if I'm 71, she was well past 65, which, by the way, why don't they bounce it to 67? I mean, why not? I mean, if you can pass the eye exam and everything else, let them fly till they're 60. Pilots are not something that they're born. Mm-hmm. Pilots are born to do what they do. And you can't change them. I mean, you and I, Eddie, before the program talked about one of our dearest friends, Will Schreiner. He and I would rather fly on an airplane than do anything else in the whole world.
I believe it.
And I mean, I've been on many flights as an entertainer where we went through storms and stuff, even though they try to avoid them, and sometimes you can't. And the people will be white knuckling it all the way. And I'd sit there and they go, "Aren't you nervous?" I said, "These things are designed to take a lot more punishment than what's out there right now. You got to be careful of certain things." What is the average percentage of foreign students you have at the school? Because I'm sure there are a lot of people. David comes from another country other than the United States. What is the percentage of foreign students that you have there, and what sort of living conditions and you have dorms and apartments and stuff for these folks to live in while they're going to school?
Yeah, well, a few things there, but as far as our student population goes, we're, like I said, incredibly diverse. We're proud to have students from all around the world. I think our last count was pushing over 80 countries we've had students from. And so we're about 50-50. We're about 50% local, 50% international. That's because we're one of the few visa authorized schools here in South Florida, right? There's only a handful of us that can legally issue student visas for international students. And so about half of our students are international. The thing is, the U.S. has open skies. We're very privileged, very lucky that anybody with the interest can go down to their local airport and get a discovery flight, right? If you're sitting in, I don't know, Indonesia or some other country, it's very difficult to go into aviation unless you know somebody. And in fact, for most countries, it's a military path. Yes. And so the vast majority of countries send their students to the U.S. to learn how to fly. So Florida is huge for that. Texas, several big academies out in Arizona. And if you visit them, there's a lot of international students. Why? Because your typical student, your U.S. local student, can go to any airport down the street and learn how to fly. But there's only a few academies like our own that have reached the level of certification and accreditation to be able to offer student visas. That's a big thing that came after 9/11. It was pretty Wild West back then, but the benefit is that it did create this whole process for international students to come in and train officially with good accredited schools. So about 50-50, a lot of South America and the Caribbean, because of where we are. Of course, Miami is the capital of South America and the Caribbean. But really, we're proud to have students from just about every corner of the world.
I know that when I was at Burnside Ott, there was a deal between Burnside Ott and JAL, Japan Airlines. And we had a lot of students come over from there. I know that there are probably a lot of students that train from other Asian airlines. And I know at Eastern's flight school, they just didn't train Eastern pilots. They trained airline pilots from other schools. that had similar equipment that, you know, a DC-9 is a DC-9 or a 727 was. And David, I know these are aircraft you don't know because they're long gone. They're long gone. They're in graveyards now, unfortunately. But these were the aircraft that I grew up with and loving very, very much. I always had a fantasy about flying a 727. Got in the flight engineer's seat once, and that was as close as I ever got to any of that stuff. But I wasn't licensed. I was just there. Before we conclude, and we've got a couple of minutes to go on the program because I promised Eddie I'd get him out of here. Talk to us about the school, how people can get a hold of you, and I know Tommy's going to put up those logos and the phone numbers where people can contact you. Eddie, why does someone need to come to your school, and talk about the advantages over someone else, not necessarily naming names?
All right. So Wayman Aviation Academy, soon to be Wayman College of Aeronautics, is the largest and longest running flight school in South Florida. Best place to get information from us is wayman.edu. That's our website. And probably the biggest differentiator is just that we are an airline oriented college now. If you come to our campus, we have open houses the last Saturday of every month. You'll see something unlike any other airport in South Florida, a campus with housing across the street for international students, great maintenance facilities, pilot shops, simulators. You know, this is not Joe CFI on the corner hanging out his shingle for 1 hour flights. This is an academy oriented at creating airline pilots, and our airline partners agree. Right. So that's probably the biggest thing. So our website, wayman.edu, and we're on all the social media platforms, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at Wayman Aviation. Really easy to find. We put a lot of stuff out there. Best thing I can say is come by for one of our open houses, give us a call to come by for a tour. And first of all, and top is take a discovery flight, whether it's with us or anywhere else. The aviation industry needs more pilots. And so if you have a spark of interest, go for a flight and see if you got the right stuff.
Yeah, exactly. David, what's the last thing you want to say?
I just to piggyback on what Eddie mentioned, I think our motto at the school is changing lives through aviation. And if I like to add to that, it's almost like you're finding life through aviation, because you may have that bug and you never really know until you hop into that airplane, and as you said, you buzz down South Beach and you really experience it firsthand. So I always recommend everybody who has the remote thought, just an interest, even if you don't know that you like it, you know, there's no harm in having the experience. I think it is one of those experiences that everybody should have at least once. And maybe you end up like us, you know, a couple thousand hours down the road. and no turning back.
Well, I want to thank both of you so much for joining us here on this program. And Eddie, I'm going to have you back. David, of course, you're always welcome on this program. I think I've made a friend in Eddie, and we're gonna figure out a way to have you guys back on more and more, and to talk about the aviation community as well as what's going on in the school. I think it's vital for South Florida to know what's in your backyard. I mean, I know you do a lot of stuff with schools and stuff, but not always. And so I thank you both very much for joining us this afternoon, and I appreciate that very, very much. And just before we get out of here, I just want to say this. I just want to thank again the Japanese Gardens of South Florida for their continued support of this program, along with the Elks Club of South Florida. And until next week, America, please take care of yourselves and take care of each other.